it means to strive toward a culture of continuous improvement. The committee's budget recommendations restore funding for FTEs to agencies and provide funding for new FTEs in order to give all of our interim, acting, and new agency directors a truly fair shot to succeed. This includes $72,000 in recurring funding for a full-time resource center coordinator at the Office of Administrative Hearings, $90,000 in recurring funding for a new workforce development navigator at the Mayor's Office of LGBTQA Affairs, $266,000 in recurring funding for 3 full-time law clerks and 1 legal assistant at the Office of Administrative Hearings, $133,000 to fund 2 IT specialists who will focus on OAH's e-filing portal, $657,000 across the financial plan from the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety to fund 1 deputy clerk and 1 legal assistant to support OAH's anticipated concealed pistol license appeals work, $386,000 to restore 3 equal opportunity specialist FTEs at the Office of Human Rights to support the office's intake and investigations, $350,000 to fund the OHR-related provisions of the Domestic Worker Employment Rights Amendment Act of 2022, including 2.5 FTEs, 1 investigator and intake specialist, 1 attorney, and a part-time outreach specialist. Funding 52 positions at the Department of Public Works, including restoring all parking enforcement officers and booters cut by the mayor's proposed budget, restoring all sweep inspector positions, the addition of parking management support staff, and adding flexible motor vehicle operator positions, which can be used to support improved graffiti removal, towing, and leaf services. Finally, I'd like to thank the collaborative efforts of advocates, stakeholders, committee, and council staff who work so hard to bring the street vendor law to life. The committee budget funds all DLCP-related costs for the Street Vendor Advancement Amendment Act of 2023, including 1 FTE to serve as vending zone program staff, 1 FTE for an additional inspector for vending enforcement, replacement of special purpose revenue with recurring local funds to account for reduced revenue due to the reduction of licensing fees, and $125,000 in recurring funds to support the Columbia Heights Mount Pleasant vending zone management contract. Moving on to public safety, my approach to public safety has always been a holistic one. No one tool alone is going to reduce crime. The solution is a mix of short-term, immediate interventions and longer-term measures, and the committee's budget recommendations reflect this. The recommendations are largely based on a coordinated approach to addressing violence and proven methods of creating safer communities, and I'm going to briefly discuss the ones that have been my priority. The committee provides, through a transfer to the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, $800,000 for enhancements to Ward 1 Violence Interruption Program service areas and associated staffing at the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. The committee establishes, through a transfer to the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety of $250,000, a safe commercial corridor in Adams Morgan to support the hiring of additional safety ambassadors. It also expands the targeted outreach ecosystem approach piloted in the Columbia Heights Civic Plaza through a transfer to the Committee on Business and Economic Development of $750,000 to support continued grant making. This funding will address the similar challenges of individuals in the adjacent neighborhoods to ultimately support holistic community development in Ward 1. The committee accepts $30,000 from the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety to enable the Office of LGBTQ Affairs to issue a grant to a district-based organization to provide LGBTQA+ cultural competency training to district first responders. Thank you to Councilmember Pinto for this transfer. The committee provides, through a transfer to the Committee on Housing, $405,000 in recurring funds starting in FY2025 for the Domestic Victims Training and Technical Assistance Program. And finally, the committee funds a $900,000 self-release booting pilot at DPW's Parking Enforcement Management Administration to increase the effectiveness, efficiency, and overall safety of DPW's parking enforcement staff. Today, the Public Works and Operations Committee is also proposing a bold move to align transportation priorities in the district that should be considered just a first step in what needs to be a comprehensive citywide effort. While some aspects of our society have been slow to return to pre-pandemic levels, one thing that has bounced back with a vengeance is vehicular traffic. Downtown is snarled with gridlock, leading to pollution, noise, and an unwelcoming environment to residents, workers, and visitors. At the same time, transit ridership is down. This balance is unsustainable, and it's harmful to our downtown corridor, our workers, and our residents. We have to act now to fundamentally reshape our approach to transportation policy in the district. The mayor's budget completely defunded the Metro for DC program that would have provided free buses starting this July. And today I'm doing my part to reverse that cut. Making public transit reliable, affordable, and available is critical to residents, workers, their livelihoods, and the businesses that they serve, especially hospitality businesses that count on them. This budget establishes a for-hire vehicle congestion management program, levying a $2 fee on digital dispatch rides, except for wheelchair accessible rides, entering or exiting the central business district during peak hours of traffic. It funds $10.3 million in recurring funds for the Fare-Free Bus Service Fund, projected to cover the cost of funding at least 12 of the highest ridership Metro bus routes in the district to run 24 hours at headways of 20 minutes or less. It also establishes $500,000 in recurring funding to improve affordable access to access for hire vehicles for all DC residents with mobility impairments. The committee budget recommendations also prioritize ensuring that our city is clean and livable. From exploring alternatives to providing basic trash and recycling services, to making sure our commercial areas are clean and vibrant, to making sure that residents and visitors alike can find a restroom that can be accessed readily without having to patronize a business, we want to make sure the district is attractive and workable for all. To accomplish this, the committee provides $1,137,000 to DPW to implement a pilot program to provide solid waste collection services through shared containers to residential homes currently serviced by DPW via front of home pickup in order to explore alternative waste containerization, hauling methods, and rodent abatement strategies. It provides through a transfer to the Committee on Business and Economic Development $8,000 to expand the service area of the Shaw Clean Team to the 1900 block of 8th Street Northwest, and it enhances DPW's budget by $347,000 in one-time funding in FY2024 to seek out a contractor partnership with a private company to place and manage 4 standalone public restrooms. And I do want to make sure to thank Council members Robert White and Louis George and their staffs for working closely with us to figure out a new strategy to advance the cause of accessible public restrooms and for being supportive of this investment. Although I no longer chair the Committee on Human Services, that's where I got my start as committee chair, and serving the district's most vulnerable residents will always remain one of my top priorities. I'm proud that in this year's budget, the committee was able to continue this work with a transfer of $1 million to the Committee on Housing to enhance the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. ERAP, as it's also known, is perennially underfunded. In fact, Council was recently informed that ERAP funds have already dried up this year, despite the mayor investing a large amount of federal disaster relief funds into it. I plan to continue to partner with Robert White, chair of the Housing Committee, and the rest of the council to find additional ERAP funding. The committee is also transferring $561,000 of recurring funds starting in FY25 to the Committee on Housing to fund 20 LRSP vouchers for returning citizens. Councilmember White, thank you for your partnership on these 2 initiatives. The committee is also making 2 transfers out to the Committee on Health. First, $200,000 to fund a pilot program that provides substance abuse and behavioral health services in the vicinity of the 600 block of T Street Northwest. This program builds on interagency and community efforts. Second, $225,000 for a grant to a home visiting program for first-time mothers who are eligible for Medicaid, a program I've supported and that has helped create positive health outcomes and family stability in the district since it was first implemented. I'm thrilled that the committee was able to find $1.5 million to transfer to the Committee on Facilities and Family Services in order to fund L24-39, the Preserving Our Kids Equity Through Trusts Amendment Act of 2022. This funding will start in FY24 and be funded through the financial plan. The Pocket Act effectively ends poverty and homelessness for our youth aging out of foster care. It ends CFSA's practice of taking the Social Security benefits of children in foster care and using them to pay for the routine costs of care that the agency is already obligated to cover under district law, and instead invest that money for youth to access when they age out of care. It also requires CFSA to access federally available vouchers for youth aging out of care. The Pocket Act also builds on the work I started with my committee colleague, Councilmember Trayon White, to recognize the importance of close relative caregivers and make those programs permanent. We owe it to our most vulnerable youth not to abandon them when they exit the system, but to set them up for success. Thank you to Councilmember Louis George for continuing this important work. I know it is in good hands. To conclude my summary of the committee's recommendations to the Local Budget Act, I want to emphasize that all of the critical enhancements made within the committee and outside of it have one common theme: good governance. In other words, the committee's recommendations are largely based on identifying inefficient or wasteful spending and reallocating those funds through the most important priorities of district residents. I've already discussed many of the priorities the committee was able to support, so I'll briefly conclude by discussing a handful of recommended reductions in the report. First, the committee makes a number of small dollar reductions in FY23 as well as in the FY24 financial plan because of historic underspending. Second, the committee was able to identify approximately $4.7 million of recurring funds in DPW's personnel services overtime budget to reduce and allocate largely to the restoration of many critical positions cut by the mayor. The committee recognizes that DPW is an agency that has a real need for overtime spending to address the special nature of their work. However, we think the agency became overly reliant on overtime under its previous director, and the committee would like to help the agency right-size its workforce to reduce this reliance going forward and ensure consistent and robust service. Right after this, I'll be recommending the committee's approval of Timothy Spriggs' nominations to be DPW's permanent director. Acting Director Spriggs has made it clear that building a robust workforce and focusing on hiring is a priority for him, and I hope the personnel budget changes we approve today will empower him to continue that work. This budget does not allocate funds toward the business and entrepreneurship. This does not allocate funds towards the Business and Entrepreneurship Support to Thrive Amendment Act, or BEST Act, which Councilmember Pinto introduced last year along with myself, Councilmember McDuffie, and Chairman Mendelson. While I strongly support making business licensing more streamlined and affordable to support our businesses in DC's economy, there was too much uncertainty and a lack of available resources in this budget year to be able to move forward on full funding in this committee. We unfortunately still do not have an updated fiscal impact on the bill, which may be much higher than originally estimated. I'm also unsure that such a seismic shift in how DLCP operates and is budgeted can easily be absorbed when it's technically still less than a year old. Councilmember Pinto, I hope to be able to work with you through the rest of this council period to continue advancing this work. Finally, I want to call attention to the School Connect program at the Department of For-Hire Vehicles. You may notice what looks like a significant cut to that program of $2.1 million recurring, but there's a lot going on under the hood. The top line is that based on the Budget Office's investigation and dialogue with the CFO and Office of Budget and Policy, it looks like that funding was not intended to be loaded into the budget as recurring from the general fund. But the money was there, clear as day. Like the Department of For-Hire Vehicles' other transport programs like Neighborhood Connect, School Connect was funded with federal ARPA dollars only, which means that unless there's a modification made by the mayor in the next year's budget, the program's planned to sunset. We confirmed that the $2.1 million would not have allowed for the continuation of the program, which makes sense because it was never meant to do that when the mayor submitted this budget. The program will continue to have a budget of $8 million in ARPA funding in the next fiscal year. Even if that error in the budget were not present, I have significant concerns about the operations of School Connect. The program goals are laudable. It's meant to complement the Safe Passage program, ensuring that students susceptible to violence are able to travel between home and school safely. While the 32 schools selected to participate in the program are in areas where youth are at risk of violence, the program does not appear to prioritize its limited enrollment for the most at-risk students. It might make sense, for instance, to work with school administration and staff at partner agencies and district government who are familiar with students most in need of the services School Connect provides. It stands to reason that without identifying and prioritizing students who are most at risk of violence, the program instead is biased towards serving students with more engaged parents or guardians who are more quickly able to sign them up. However, for such a program with such a specific goal, it does not appear that the enrollment strategy is reflective of the overall mission. We've not been provided with any performance goals or metrics for the School Connect program. It's unclear whether participation in the program actually does reduce students' exposure to violence or improve other metrics like school attendance and performance. Further, School Connect is by far the single largest program within Department of For-Hire Vehicles, with 1 out of every 3 people employed by DFHV working on School Connect, a program that has only existed since late 2021. The current capacity of School Connect is 300 students, and it does not appear this budget plans to scale up that capacity. That equates to a per student cost of close to $27,000, which, if I'm correct, is more than is allocated to each student in the per pupil funding formula of DCPS. All that said, the reduction from School Connect should not do any harm to the 300 students currently enrolled in the program. I agree that at least in concept, this is something we should be doing to ensure the safety of DC students. But if the mayor is going to continue funding this program after this budget cycle, council is really going to need some more transparency and a plan for the program's long-term sustainability. Now we'll discuss the 6 Budget Support Act subtitles proposed by the mayor and the committee. First, the mayor introduced the Office of Chief Technology Officer Amendment Act of 2023 and the Concealed Pistol License Appeals Amendment Act of 2023. Office of Chief Technology Officer Amendment Act of 2023 clarifies Octo's responsibility to safeguard district government's assets against cybersecurity threats to better ensure the agency's ability to coordinate cybersecurity efforts and requires the agency to appoint a Chief Information Security Officer to lead those efforts. The subtitle also includes language to clarify Octo's existing authority to leverage district-owned telecommunications and infrastructure assets in order to ensure that all district residents and businesses have equitable and affordable access to high-speed internet service. This clarification will help to ensure that Octo can incentivize non-governmental actors to take part in digital equity programming and that excess capacity of district-owned telecommunications assets can be used to generate revenue for the district. The subtitle also amends Octo's current grant-making authority by removing language that limits the authority exclusively to the use of funds granted by Congress under the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Removal of this limitation will ensure that Octo's authority to make grants and subgrants to stimulate, support, and promote the development of innovating technology will be broad enough to implement the competitive subgrant programming required by the Federal Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. Finally, the subtitle clarifies that Octo's authority extends to all government agencies, including independent agencies except for those explicitly accepted. This means that other than for those accepted, all agencies will be subject to Octo regulations, that Octo must review and approve these agencies' proposals, purchase orders, and contracts for the acquisition of information technology and telecommunication systems, resources, and services, and recommend approval or disapproval, and that Octo must review and approve the information technology and telecommunications budgets for these agencies. Extending Octo's authority to non-subordinate agencies will ensure that all agencies have sound cybersecurity policies and practices in place and help to prevent data breaches from occurring in the future and to mitigate their impact if they do. The only change the committee print makes to the subtitle is introduced is to add the Office of the Ombudsperson for Children back in as one of the entities accepted from Octo's authority. The Office of the Ombudsperson for Children is currently accepted from Octo authority, and the subtitle as introduced would have removed that independence. We recommend approval of this subtitle. Regarding the Concealed Pistol License Appeals Amendment Act of 2023, currently, an individual who's denied a concealed pistol license or has an existing concealed pistol license revoked or suspended may file an appeal to the Concealed Pistol Licensing Review Board. The subtitle would dissolve the CPLRB and shift its duties to the Office of Administrative Hearings. Unfortunately, the committee is unable to move it because it amends Title 22 of the DC Official Code, thus triggering a 60-day congressional review period instead of the typical 30-day review. However, this committee and the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety is generally supportive of the intent of this legislation, and for this reason, we'll work with the executive and the rest of the council to move similar legislation this fiscal year. Additionally, 3 FTEs have been set aside to support the transfer of CPLRB's duties to OAH, 2 of which were funded with a transfer from the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. Moving to the committee's proposals, the committee first recommends the adoption of the Clean Curbs Pilot Program Amendment Act of 2023. This subtitle would establish a pilot program expected to serve approximately 150 households to establish curbside shared solid waste collection containers. These containers would be locked for use only by participating households on a selected pilot basis block. In essence, service similar to a multifamily building. The trade-off for taking their trash and recycling a short walk down the block, if the program is successful, is less blocking of sidewalks, minimized litter spillage, and reduction in food supply for rodents and other pests. It's also intended as a dump and forget system from the prospective resident who would not have to worry about taking their trash carts to the curb and bringing them back on collection days. The fiscal impact of this subtitle is $250,000 for salary and fringe for 2-term FTEs, as well as $1,115,000 for a total of $1,330,000. Second, the committee recommends the adoption of the Taxicab Advertising Permitting Authority Amendment Act of 2023. Despite broad authority over the regulation of taxicabs, DFHV does not have the explicit authority to permit rooftop advertising on taxicabs. To address this, the committee recommends moving a subtitle clarifying the authority to permit advertising on taxicabs lies with DFHV, since there's currently regulatory uncertainty. The subtitle largely adopts language from Title 12A of DC Municipal Regulations and allows for the establishment of new rules to effectuate DFHV's authority. The subtitle will not have a fiscal impact. However, it establishes the authority for charging permitting fees and directs the revenues for those fees. Third, the committee recommends adoption for the For-Hire Vehicle Congestion Management Program Amendment Act of 2023. The subtitle addresses periods of high traffic congestion in the district's core by levying a $2 fee on digital dispatch companies for all rides entering the downtown core between 7 a.m. and 12 p.m. and rides departing the same area between 12 and 7 p.m. The cordon area was determined by overlaying the CBD boundary on DFHV's map showing the highest activity census tracts. The subtitle exempts wheelchair accessible vehicle rides. We're working on a final map of the tracks selected, but the Cordon area was determined by looking at DFHV's data on the highest activity census tracts with major congestion issues, which includes the Central Business District and Southwest. It does not include the census tract with Union Station. The subtitle also exempts wheelchair accessible vehicle rides. The revenue recognized by the addition of this subtitle will fund $10.3 million in recurring funds deposited to the Fare Free Bus Service Fund, which should be able to cover the cost of establishing a 24-hour bus network on at least 12 of our highest ridership lines. It also establishes a $500,000 recurring wheelchair accessible vehicle fund. This congestion management program will fulfill significant policy priorities of the District of Columbia: sustainability, Vision Zero, and livability, to name a few, while providing a critical funding source for public transit. Investing the income generated by the subtitle into improved transit service, particularly 24-hour bus service, has very clear impacts on racial equity in the district. The committee report includes an excerpt from the Racial Equity Impact Assessment on Metro for DC, outlining the disparity in transportation access in the district. The committee shares the executive's vision for a mixed-use, vibrant downtown core by investing in new housing and neighborhood services. In the committee's view, the current moment provides an opportunity to confidently assert the district's values as this growth proceeds. A revitalized downtown and the millions of people who travel to, from, and within it deserve frequent, reliable, and fare-free public transit. When we first received this budget, like many of my colleagues, I had a lot of concerns. Concerns about the stark reality of our revenue situation and concerns about the large reductions to the workforces of multiple agencies and zeroing out various council-promoted programs. Frankly, I didn't have a lot of hope for this budget. Today, we're passing on a committee report that restores funding to critical programs, brings back agency positions needed to provide residents with the robust services they need and expect, and brings to life important programs and services that we've passed in the past 2 years and will reach and benefit district residents living in all 8 wards. I hope this is only the beginning of the progress we can make in strengthening our most essential government services. I know a number of people, including my colleagues, have noticed how excited I get about trash since I started as chair of this committee, and I won't deny it. I'm not sure there's a more quintessential role of government than taking care of the basic needs of residents. I'm really looking forward to working with my council colleagues on this dais in the coming months and years to make public works really work for the public. With that, I move in block the report on the committee's recommendations on the fiscal year 2024 proposed budget and the committee's recommendations on the fiscal year 2024 Budget Support Act of 2023, with leave for staff to make technical, conforming, and editorial changes. Are there any comments or discussion?
Chairwoman, can you see me?
Councilmember Pinto.
Great, thanks so much. Well, congratulations to you and your team on this excellent and exciting committee report. And I want to congratulate you as well on chairing this committee. I love the way and enthusiasm with which you talk about these topics. And I think it is really important to share that message of how vitally important government services are, and including trash pickup, and especially trash pickup, and keeping a clean city. So appreciate your framing and lens on that. I want to thank you for a couple of specific things in here that I am really excited about. I appreciate an added focus on building public restrooms. I know we share a goal to have more public restrooms throughout the city, and I think the strategy of partnering to have some standalone public restrooms is a great start as we continue that work moving forward. I'm appreciative of your investment for a workforce development navigator. I think that's going to be really important for the Mayor's Office of LGBTQ Affairs and making sure that we're continuing to build the pipeline of workforce there. Appreciate your funding for sweep inspector positions, as well as the $1 million transfer that you were able to provide to the Housing Committee for an expansion of ERAP funding, which is going to be continued huge need for our city this year. Thank you for the vouchers for returning citizens, as well as the dedicated funding that you sent to the Committee on Health for a pilot program for substance abuse and behavioral health issues around 600 and T Street. You and I have worked on many different strategies for this area over the last several months and years, and really appreciate you thinking outside the box and trying to make an investment that can hopefully make a difference and improve the situation that's going on there. That's extremely concerning and problematic. I do want to raise a concern I have about the congestion pricing. And I'm worried in a couple of regards. First, I'm worried that this has a disproportionate impact on residents who live downtown. While the rideshare companies can absorb these costs, I think in reality, they will likely pass along these costs to the consumers, and that disproportionately will fall on residents who live downtown. And so by nature of living there, anytime they take one of these rides, they will be having to pay a premium just to leave their home or get home. And so I'm concerned about that point. And I'm also really concerned about our larger strategy of reimagining our downtown. I think we've been talking for a long time about how we can most effectively reimagine our spaces downtown, whether that's converting vacant office spaces to more mixed-use development, bringing more retail, bringing more people to live downtown, and making sure that that's affordable to do so. And I worry that something like this could disincentivize some of those efforts to bring more people downtown, which is a really big part of our strategy for the city going forward. So I guess if you can articulate a little bit more, Chairwoman, about your thinking behind the congestion pricing and kind of how you came up with that area, and if you could re-go over the times that would be affected.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilmember Pinto, for those questions. So the program actually shouldn't impact people living downtown unless they are not sleeping where they live, essentially, because the charges for rides that end downtown from 7 a.m. to noon, and rides that originate from downtown from noon to 7 p.m. So it's the reverse. So that, I think, helps address that concern. The other thing is, people who live downtown, I'm sure, are feeling what those of us who are working downtown also feel, which is this incredible, really crushing feeling of the traffic congestion that we're dealing with right now. As I said in my remarks, not many things have come back to full force since the pandemic, but traffic has come back with a vengeance, and feeling it downtown more than anywhere else. And so reducing that congestion is a benefit to everybody who lives and works down here. Now, the beautiful thing about living downtown, I believe, is having such ready access to transit, bus, metro, bike share, scooters, and walkability. And what I think is really important to understand is, with this measure, we are rebalancing our transportation patterns. We want people to start using the bus by making it free and more reliable. And in this case, this piece of the budget will fund that overnight bus that for so many years, small businesses have been saying they need. Those in the nightlife industry to get home after work, those working overnight, cleaning apartment buildings downtown, or office buildings downtown, I should say, getting home on the bus and not relying on their own vehicles or a ride share or a taxi. So that's the thinking behind it. And I really appreciate you raising those issues. We tried to be really thoughtful about that. And certainly, given that this is being newly proposed in the district in this way, we're happy to keep talking about those details.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and definitely I'm interested in learning more and having a longer discussion about it. I still do have some concerns, I will say, but I'm happy to support your budget today in its entirety, but look forward to continuing that dialogue and making sure that the potentially unanticipated consequences are thoroughly considered.
Absolutely. And we'll share some information we have with you as well about how it works in Chicago, where they have even more people living downtown than we do. So you can just get a sense of how it's been operationalized elsewhere. So you have that info. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'll now turn to at-large Councilmember Robert White for any discussion.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Nadeau. I want to thank you and your team for the hard work and time it took you all to complete this budget. I know there were a lot of late nights and calls on the team. Your committee has many of the agencies my committee had last year, and I want to start by thanking you and your team for continuing to invest in these agencies, including the Office of Human Rights, the Office of Administrative Hearings, and the Office of LGBTQ Affairs. And I want to recognize and take a moment to mention some of the investments and policy proposals that you've made in this budget that stood out to me. On the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection, very glad to see the committee was able to fund all DLCP related costs of the Street Vendor Advancement Amendment Act, which includes 2 FTEs and funds to ensure the bill is implemented well and to account for reduced revenue due to the reduction of licensing fees. This is going to help make it safer and easier for vendors who are often people of color, women, and immigrants to operate vending carts in the district. On DPW, I was very glad to see the committee reallocate $4.7 million of DPW's overtime budget to restore over 50 critical positions cut by the mayor and invest in other projects that make the agency more responsive and effective for our residents. As someone who values eco-friendly and green policies and initiatives, I was reassured to see a $1.1 million investment for a pilot program to provide solid waste collection services to residential homes currently served by DPW through front of home pickup and to explore alternative waste methods. This will help minimize the negative impact on the planet. I also hope that this project includes regular updates from DPW to committee members on the progress of the pilot and to mitigate delays of the pilot. On the Office of Human Rights, I was so glad to see the committee restore 3 equal opportunity specialist FTEs to support intake and investigations at OHR. As the previous chair of the committee with jurisdiction over OHR, I know how important this is to the agency to have sufficient staff for the high volume of cases they receive each year and our residents. Department of For-Hire Vehicles, I noticed that the committee introduced a new subtitle, which you were just discussing, the For-Hire Vehicle Congestion Program Amendment Act of 2023, which imposes a $2 fee to companies that use digital dispatch rides entering or exiting the central business district during peak hours of traffic. I commend the intent to decrease high traffic congestion in the city and to encourage people to use public transportation while traveling in and out of the district. The subtitle would use the revenue generated to support a $10.3 million fare-free bus service fund and $500,000 over the financial plan to support wheelchair accessible vehicle services. This is a great goal to have, and it contributes to Vision Zero. I'd also like to hear from businesses and residents that may be impacted by the subtitle, and I'm looking forward to discussing it in further detail. And on the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, funding to hire a workforce development navigator to ensure our workforce programs better and more meaningfully engage with members of the LGBTQ community is absolutely a step in the right direction. And finally, I want to thank you for the transfer of funds to the Housing Committee, including a transfer of $1 million to the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, $404,000 in recurring funds for the Domestic Violence Training and Technical Assistance Program, $561,000 recurring funds for 20 vouchers for returning citizens designated by ORCA. These are housing vouchers, and $30,000 in recurring funds to enhance the emergency housing assistance program starting in fiscal year 25. Your investments in these programs are critical to our most vulnerable residents. Again, a huge thanks to you and your staff for the tremendous amount of work, collaboration that you have spent preparing this budget for markup. So again, thank you all very much. I look forward to voting in support of these budget recommendations.
Thank you, Councilmember White. And I really also just want to thank you for such a strong and warm handoff of the agencies that you used to oversee. You were such a good steward of these agencies, and I strive to do the same and even better if it comes down to it. And I also want to thank your staff for working with mine and coming up with some really creative solutions to sharing funding burdens on shared priorities. We had some funding in out years, you had some funding in earlier years, and working together, we were able to cobble together some things for our most vulnerable residents that will have a deep impact. And I really appreciate that partnership. So thank you. With that being said, I ask all those in favor of the measure before us to indicate by saying aye.
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 Hearing ayes from everyone, the measure is adopted unanimously. Now, before I briefly recess, and don't go anywhere because we've got another markup here, but before I briefly recess, I want to take a moment to thank my own committee staff for their work in preparing these recommendations. Truly, truly, this is an incredible team. David Meny, our legislative director and deputy chief of staff, Ariel Ardura, our senior legislative counsel, Sabrine Kadi, our legislative aide, Ben Davis, special assistant, and Alex Joseph, our wonderful spring intern. I also want to send a special thank you to our committee's general counsel, Sandra Karpinski and Valerie Nadeau, to all the great people at OSEC and in cable television for ensuring we are able to keep all of our hearings accessible to the public and the council's budget office, including Joe Wolf, Ann Phelps, Jen Budoff, and Avril Caraway. With an extra special and heartfelt thank you for Sam Hodges, the Committee on Public Works and Operations Budget Analyst. We rely on your guidance and appreciate the extra effort you gave us in our first year with the committee. Finally, I want to thank my personal office staff, without whom this committee and I would not be able to function. And if there's no further business before the committee, the time is 4:16 p.m. and this additional meeting of the Committee on Human Services is adjourned. Ask everybody on Zoom to remain on Zoom for just a minute while we reset with cable television. Good afternoon. I'm Brianne Nadeau, Councilmember for Ward 1, Chairperson of the Council Committee on Human Services. Today is Wednesday, April 26, 2023, and this meeting is being held as a hybrid on the online platform Zoom and in the council chambers at the John A. Wilson Building. The time is 4:20 p.m. And I'm calling to order this additional meeting of the committee. For the record, I'd like to note that we have a quorum consisting of at-large member, Councilmember Robert White, and Ward 2 Councilmember Brooke Pinto, and myself. The committee will consider and vote on proposed resolution 25-71, Director of the Department of Public Works, Timothy Spriggs confirmation resolution of 2023. PR 25-71 was introduced on January 24th, 2023 by Chairman Mendelson at the request of the mayor, and it was referred to the Committee on Public Works and Operations for consideration on February 7th, 2023. The purpose of the proposed resolution is to confirm Acting Director Timothy Spriggs as Director of the Department of Public Works, or DPW, to serve at the pleasure of the mayor. DPW provides some of the district's most important municipal services, including solid waste management and parking enforcement. My priorities as chair of this committee are to ensure that our city has excellent trash and recycling services, whether provided by DPW or by private haulers with DPW enforcement, that we are doing everything possible to meet and ideally exceed the district's waste diversion goals of getting 80% of our waste away from landfills and incinerators by 2032, and then enforcement of curbside space is prioritized and expanded, recognizing that it is currently one of our only real tools for improving traffic safety in the district. I'm hopeful that as permanent director, Acting Director Spriggs will also adopt these priorities. DPW's stated mission is to provide environmentally healthy municipal services that are both ecologically sound and cost-effective, and it's one with which Acting Director Spriggs is very familiar. He's been the agency's acting director since January, and he previously held the positions of administrator of the agency's Safety and Security Administration and Citywide Snow Program Coordinator. He has over 10 years of experience leading strategic government operations, leveraging cross-agency partnerships, and supporting emergency management efforts. Prior to joining DPW, Director Spriggs delivered the first government-wide cyber identity smart card program to enable seamless access across the entire Federal Emergency Management Agency's enterprise network and deployed the transportation and warehouse network to distribute pandemic-related supplies. Director Spriggs received a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from the University of Richmond, a Master of Science in Security Management from Webster University Joint Base Anacostia Bolling Air Force Base, and Master of Science in Human Resource Management and Leadership Development from National Louis University. The committee held a public roundtable on Director Spriggs' nomination on March 14th, 2023. We had a number of witnesses testify about his qualifications for the role. Brigadier General Aaron R. Dean II, a former colleague and supervisor of Director Spriggs, testified in support of his confirmation, noting his operational expertise, honesty, and ability to innovate as qualities that will enable him to succeed as director. Kevin Pogue, president of AFSCME Local 2091, also testified in support of Acting Director Spriggs, noting that in the short time since Mr. Spriggs assumed the role, he's worked to make improvements for DPW employees, including better job site security and critical training for new hires. Several other witnesses also testified in support of confirming Director Spriggs. A number of environmental advocates testified that while they were not endorsing Director Spriggs, they were also not opposing his confirmation. They noted that they appreciated his willingness to engage with them, but flagged that because of his lack of experience in waste diversion, his confirmation will make it all the more important that the agency prioritize hiring for the manager of the Office of Waste Diversion. With that said, I'm recommending the approval of the committee report in print for PR 25-71. Is there any discussion on the report or print?
Chairwoman.
Thank you. I'm sorry. It's hard for me to see you up there. Okay. Councilmember Pinto.
No problem. I figured. I just wanted to thank and congratulate Acting Director Spriggs for coming into this really important role and already thinking creatively and strategically about how to solve some of the gaps in services that we've seen, whether that's new operations teams to be kind of rotating in the event of staff calling out sick, and other ways to make sure that the delivery of service can be more consistent as we seek to expand Rubicon and other technologies to make sure that people aren't missing their trash pickup, and that that's not being done certainly consistently. And so I want to thank him for taking on this role, and I'm excited to support his nomination today. And I want to just also use this opportunity to thank two members in particular on his team, Sonia Street from the sweep team and Leah Rogers from the cleaning division, who have been really very responsive and very helpful partners in our office in assisting constituents. So thank you all, and look forward to supporting this nomination today. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you so much. Right. If there are no other remarks, I will move to approve the committee report and print in block for PR 25-71 with leave for staff to make technical and conforming changes. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 And with that, unanimous vote, we finally have one less acting director in our committee. Is there any other business before the committee? Okay, hearing none. The time is now 4:26 p.m. and this additional meeting of the Committee on Public Works and Operations is adjourned.
Thank you. Congratulations.